grounding to get us here on planet parent activism and not, the shit show that's happening in the outside world. So Deborah, take it away.
Welcome to Fearless Chat 34. And we're coming at you from the Caribbean, from the United States and Australia. This is one of the beautiful things about 2020. It really has, in its own way, brought the world together. So what we're going to do now is just going to breathe together so we can be in this moment with all of the moments that are happening. So if it's available to you, you might just find yourself just relaxing a little bit deeper into your body. And you can allow your eyes just to rest away from the screen and just follow my voice. Welcome to the Fearless Fire, where you get to turn up however you are. We welcome you from all corners of the globe and with all that you have, body, mind, heart, and spirit. So wherever you are, it may be the end of your day, it may be the beginning of your day. But now I'm just going to take in a breath just to welcome this moment and just to ground into your belly with your breath, which grounds you into this present moment now. And feeling as you take a breath in, and if you focus that intention down into your belly, what we call in our fearless world our zorch, if you focus your intention there on the in-breath, what happens is that you create a little bit more space for yourself. And I remember the days when I was parenting, and one thing I wanted was just a little bit more space. Not in all moments, but in some moments. So what we're going to do now, in your own time, in your own fearless way, sitting around our fearless fire across the world, you're going to take in 3 breaths deep into your belly, and you're going to allow that in-breath to bring in the possibilities and open to more space. And then on the out-breath, you're invited to let go of whatever you don't want to be carrying with you any further into the day, or anything that's in your way from your listening around our fearless fire today. So in your own way, taking your own 3 breaths into the belly, and creating space. And when you let that breath go, you can let go of whatever you don't want to carry any longer. Now, arriving in this moment from all the corners of the world around our fearless fire, just taking one last big deep breath, roll the shoulders and arrive back to the screen for time with Eduardo and Callan and parenting as activism. Welcome.
I got very excited and I started yazzing without into mute. So Elevate Sparkulation, Deborah, thank you so much. Welcome now that we are grounded in the various spaces that we're joining from all over the world. My name is Eduardo Placer. I'm the founder of Fearless Communicators. We are a diverse, inclusive public speaking coaching business. We work with thought leaders on what they say and how they say it. And this Fearless Chat series really emerged in March as our response to wanting to create one community and value to our community at the intersection of all the questions that people were asking as we were all impacted by COVID. And over the course of, 6 months, we have now had 34 conversations featuring all of our thought leaders in our community around topics that were top of mind for our community. And we are now finding ourselves in August in back to school land. And it was very much in that space that we were thinking about parents and navigating parenthood and the various ways that parents were managing this pandemic, not just emotionally, but also professionally. Like, what are the various ways that parents have to be navigating this moment. And when we knew that we wanted to talk about that, of course, top of mind for us was Callan Blount Fleming, who's the founder of Spark Collective. She is a Fearless Force participant. She was in our last Fearless Force program. Was that true in March? No, no, you did December. That's right, you did December. You are one of the two Fearless Force women who were actually pregnant, carrying child during the program. How pregnant were you when you were in that December program? You were
5 or 6 months.
5, 6 months?
Yeah.
And what's a little funny fact about our Fearless women who have all done the Fearless Force program is that they've all given birth to boys. So far, the 2 women who've been pregnant, and then subsequently those who have given birth after the Fearless Force program have all given birth to boys. So creating new spaces for men to be inclusive of women and their powerful mothers in the various ways that they're showing up, creating on the planet. And when we tapped Callan to have this conversation, what really emerged was this idea of activism and how parents can be active and activists. And then I think also how those of us who are related to parents in our family, in our various relational ways, can also be advocates and allies to the parents in our community in this time as well. So Callan, I'm just grateful to have you, and just an opportunity for you to dive right in. And the opportunity really is for this to be a conversation. So we'll have breaking points throughout this presentation to be engaged in conversation. And let's take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful to everyone for being here today and for engaging in this conversation. And I'll start by saying that if there is one thing that you need to know about me, it is that I am super, super passionate about making work actually work for parents. It is what gets me up in the morning. It is what I think about when I wake up in the middle of the night, that and feeding my new son. I am just on fire about how we can improve the workplace and all of our systems so that parents and really all people are centered in our design and in the intention of how we are operating. And as Eduardo alluded to, back in March, when we got into the stay-at-home orders here in New York, and we were starting to see what this pandemic really was, I was 2 weeks away from having my second child. And so I was starting to go into kind of my posture of observation while I was on leave, but I knew that this moment was going to be really, really challenging for parents, and it was going to be really challenging for companies, because I'd been spending the past 3 years or so working with companies to figure out how they could be great places for parents to work. And I had a sense that everyone was going to kind of feel in over their heads. And so I started to watch the conversations, the social media posts, the New York Times parenting blogs, like the whole thing. And the first real phase was just action. You know, parents going into color-coded calendars and learning how to be remote teachers and setting up snack bars for their kids. And, you know, the New York Times parenting section being all about like, here's how you can all of a sudden become a fabulous remote teacher. And there was this sense of like, we're just going to buckle down. We're just going to figure this out. We're just going to get through this, like one like hellaciously long snow day, right? And then about 3 weeks later, you started to see people and parents fray. Like the tone went from like, I have this color-coded calendar to like, that's going in the trash. I'm grabbing the iPad. And by the way, I do not judge that. My daughter's watching Disney Plus right now. But there was a whole lot of throwaway of that plan and of that idea. And it was because parents were exhausted. You know, they were waking up at 4 or 5 a.m. to do 3 hours of work, to then kind of work, but really parent in the middle of the day. And then they were doing work until 12 o'clock at night. And it was just on repeat. And it was really, really hurting parents. And this is all on top of a global pandemic, right? So then you fast forward 3 months later, I'm still on leave and I'm reading the articles, I'm seeing the post, and the tone goes from kind of resigned and quiet to what's been happening throughout the school year to just absolutely outraged. Like summer camps had been canceled. No one had a plan for school. No one was really communicating what was going to happen. And there was just a lot of anger. But what I was noticing is the articles, the posts, the conversations almost always stopped short of action. And I was desperate. I was desperate for the call sheet. You know, who do I call to fix this? And also, what do I ask for? Like, what's the solution? Like, where are my bullet points? And how do I help companies? And how do I just like activate in this moment? Because quite obviously, we need help. And when I pressed folks on why they felt like it was, there was a group of folks that were like, I just think we're all really tired. And so we're having a hard time activating ourselves. There was another group like me that was like, I've got some energy right now, but I don't know what I'm actually asking for. And then there was also a little bit of feedback that was like, I'm just mad that I even have to be the one to solve this problem. Like, why is it on me to have to figure this thing out? But if we have learned anything in the past 6 months, it's that no one's coming to save us. Like,
Yes.
no one's coming to save parents. There is no white knight in shining armor. There is no plan. And it's going to be on us to figure it out. And I know that that's so hard for parents to hear, especially if you feel like your nose is just barely above the waterline. But I do believe there's a way for us to build this life raft together. And I have hope in this moment because, like, we are working parents in America who have kids under the age of 18 are 40% of the workforce. We are a very large part of the general populace and just the people who vote. We, by and large, most parents of school-age kids are millennials or Gen X, and we are famous for saying things when we don't like it. We are famous for voting with our ballot, with our wallets, with our talent when we don't like what's up. And so we have this power, and I worry from time to time that we forget that we have this opportunity to be activists and that we have this power that we can own and that we can push forward. So,
Callan, I think I just want to say that
I
still feel like parents are baby boomers.
Yeah.
Like in my mind, because my parents are baby boomers, like the frame that I have for parents is baby boomers. And like it is millennials, you know, who now have the kids that are like 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. And a millennial is a very specific personality type. You know, I'm generalizing, but there's like millennial, there's like Generation X, but that fire, that like the entitlement, like I deserve, you know, that there's a certain energy that I feel like in response to baby boomer parents, you know, Generation X and millennials reacted, you know, and parented in a different style. It's very interesting to see what self-advocacy looks like in millennial parents, not just because I think our frame of millennials is like millennials were like the 18-year-olds and the 22-year-olds who were flooding the workplace. And there was like a workplace narrative around millennials. And I feel like I never thought of, oh, wait a second. They're the parents. They're the parents now, right? And I'm just curious what you've tracked, you know, because you and I are, I guess, cuspy, right? We're cuspy. We're like Generation X. We're Zennials, you know. We're Generation X and millennial. But what are you noticing as, because what's interesting is a lot of the managers are probably baby boomers or Generation X managing millennial parents. I'm just curious if you're noticing any tension or what are you noticing in that dynamic?
Yeah, it's a really great point. I mean, I think that companies, leaders, you know, CEOs, HR executives have been fearing the millennial for a long time, right? So they came into the workforce, they needed more attention. And again, this is all generalizations.
This is general. We're acknowledging, we're having a conversation that's generalizing for millennials. We love millennials, celebrate millennials, acknowledge the you that is millennial.
Yeah. But there was this concern that that their whole relationship to work had totally shifted. And the main shifts that we're seeing is that they aren't as loyal to a workplace as their parents used to be or their grandparents, just because their workplace exists. Like, they'll be loyal to you if you invest in them and if you guide them and if you create experiences that are, you know, that help them to learn and help them to grow. And so that's one of the biggest transitions that I've seen. And I've also seen that there is a centering of family, which is really interesting, and an ambitiousness at the same time. Like, we really want it all. Like, and we're really going to fight for it all. And that doesn't mean we want it all to do. Like, having it all is not having it all to do.
Right.
It means I should be able to have a career, and I should be able to have a life, and I should be able to show up as my whole self. And if you can't handle that, I will find someone who can.
Yeah.
And so that has been the dynamic before the pandemic. Obviously, also on top of that was a really good economy and a low employment rate, right? So unemployment rate. So there was competition to be a great place to work. Now, because there's a little bit of a retraction, you know, I think some folks are stepping back a little bit from that activism because they're happy to have a job.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And thank you for letting us deviate into, because I had never clocked that before. That
Yeah.
I always think that parents is
millennials are having babies. And remember that there are a lot of millennials. So like, again, it is the largest generation that is coming up, and it's going to kind of be the big block for a long time.
Right.
And they're going to be raising their kids for, you know, the next many years. So how are we putting our structures in place that are going to account for that?
And I think, and I think that is, and I think that now's a great opportunity to, I think about what this activism looks like, right? There are different phases or levels of consciousness around this activism, right? So if we were to zoom in, you know, on the first phase of this activism, where do we begin? Yeah. So I first just want to say that I think parents are kind of natural activists. Like we're kind of these big optimists, right? Because we think that we can bring a child into the world and put our heart onto the outside of us and let them kind of like roam around and that'll all work out. And we want to create a world that's really great for our kids. And we think that that's possible in many ways. But also parents are very action oriented, right? And that's really the difference between outrage and activism, is that activism is outrage plus action. Brittany Packman kind of counts that. Like we take steps, but oftentimes I find that parents are more likely to do that for the sake of their kids than they're willing to do it for the sake of themselves. Right. And that is a huge shift that we need to make in understanding that when we show up better, our kids are better, and the world 20 years from now is better for them. So to me, I think about activism, I think about parenting and activism in 3 phases. The first phase is, how am I being an activist within myself? How am I being one in my relationship and in my community? And how am I being an activist in systems? So self, community, systems. And for me, self really gets started. I think back to this like origin story for me. I was 17 years old, sitting in a high school assembly. I went to one of these all girls schools for 14 years, where I was told I could be whatever I wanted to be. And there was a woman on stage telling us about how she was the ambassador to Sweden or Switzerland or somewhere. And she had on an amazing outfit and wonderful shoes, and she had a wonderful family. And I just didn't believe it. I was like, there's no way that you can be perfect in all of these domains in 24 hours a day. It's just not possible in my mind, or at least not possible for me. And so I decided in that moment that I was never going to have kids. Like, because I was like, if it's between kids or a career, I'm going to go where the power is. And I'm 17 years old, and I'm noticing that women who have jobs have more power. So I'm going to go do that thing. And a great wardrobe.
Great wardrobe.
She was crushing it. She had like
crushing it, right?
Outfit, shoes, all of it.
Yeah. So I was thinking about, I made this decision, and I lived that decision for like 15 years, right? Until I met my husband, and I wanted to marry him, and he wanted to have kids. And I had to start to confront, what were these stories I was telling myself about being a parent? And what I'll say about activism within ourselves is, we notice from time to time that there are things we believe or we do or habits we have that are not working for us. And the first place we need to start is pushing up against that is within us that's not working for us. And so for me, it was this story that, one, I had to be a perfect parent. And luckily, I realized pretty quickly that it wouldn't matter if I was a perfect parent, because my kids aren't going to listen to me anyway. So that can do away with. But then the second thing was like that I had to pit work and life against each other. And I think we talked about this last week in the Fearless Chat, 33, was that like we put these things at odds with one another. And the third, which is really important to my story, is that I was in it alone. Like, I made an assumption at 17 that if I was going to be a mom, even if I decided to do that within the context of a relationship, that I was in charge of the home. And that's really interesting to me. And so as I think about activism within ourselves, especially right now during this pandemic, I think about what are the stories that we're holding on to, whether we're a parent or we love a parent and we're here to support them, that aren't working for us anymore, right? Like, do you believe that men are better at work and women are better at childcare? Science proves that's not true, but do you believe it? You know, do you believe that to be successful, you need to work 10 to 12 hours a day, which is making parenting being really tough? You know, do you have anxiety around your stories of perfectionism? To me, that's where we really have to get started. And I'll just name this, especially in the context of our world in this country that I am operating in. As a white woman, I have to be very careful that when I think about my experiences of being a mother or being a woman, that I am opening up the space and the perspective of how other people are experiencing it too, because everything in this world is centered on that identity of like the white experience or the middle class experience or the married experience, right? But we actually need to be opening up our mindsets to, there's so many different people approaching caregiving and parenting in different ways, and what stories am I telling myself and what stories am I listening to that create space for everybody?
I think that's so powerful, because I think there is, I think that there are many types of parents. That parenting in itself, like, I guess there's a framing that is inherently a heterosexual couple, that's married, that's in their early 30s, that are, if we're looking at commercials and stuff like that, they're white, they have a really nice house with a lot of space, and a backyard. And what are the ways that we can start disrupting that narrative to start being more inclusive of the parenting experience, to understand also where we can also lend support.
Yeah.
Right. And where are we also in our narratives also perpetuating stereotype? Where are we also perpetuating that bias? In how we even consider parenting and supportive parenting.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just curious, I don't know if people are open to sharing in the chat, but like, are there stories that you have told yourself either in your own parenting or as a lover of parents that like you're kind of pushing up against right now, or that this moment is demanding that you kind of push up against? I'm just curious if people are willing to share that.
As people are reflecting and placing in the chat, there's something that's come up for me, which I think has to do with the switch. So if you have, for example, a woman identifying primary worker and a male identifying primary caretaker, right? Then I can track an experience of one like castration. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes for the person, the male identifying person, in now that I'm in this caretaking role, like wait a second, I didn't sign up for this. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I think sometimes there's depression, there's failure narratives, around like what providing is supposed to look like versus inability to provide because they're not, or maybe they lost a job, and now because they lost a job and the woman is the one who's like taking the job, they're the ones who have to take care of the child, like not having the tools to do that. So there's a way in partnership that the gender rolling is also flipped on its head, because it also feels like it's just survival at this point. It's like, if you're home and you can be with the kids, you're going to be with them, and I'm the one who's working, I'm working, we'll figure it out, or not figuring it out and then not talking about it. So then there's like this tension that exists within the household.
Yeah. So a few things that brings up for me. The first is, we do such a number on ourselves by not valuing caregiving.
Yeah.
We just, like, caregiving is, as Eve Rodsky says this, holding your child's hand at the doctor is as important as a board meeting. It just is. But we don't think of it that way. And part of that, I mean, it's and when I say we, I'm going to say like American kind of typical dominant culture. It's a function of white supremacy culture. It's a function of patriarchy, right? Like we have, I don't know which came first. I don't know if we put women and caregiving together because of a lack of value on women or a lack of value on caregiving, but we put the two together because that was kind of the American patriarchal kind of construct of going about it. And there's great books about this and how it's all kind of come together. But that is a huge shift that we need to make, and that is being made right now, generally speaking, because so many people are at home working and seeing what it requires to raise and teach their children. And it's opening some people's minds and perspectives. The other thing I'll say too is that, interestingly enough, when you have women who are the sole breadwinner of their family, they still do more of the home-based tasks than the parent who stays at home.
Mm.
And that
Ruby's nodding in affirmation. Ruby's like, yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes, if it's a heterosexual couple and a male is staying home, there's also a nanny or a caregiver who is supporting that person when it typically isn't the same when you flip it around. So there's a lot around, and Ben has a great point here too. Yes, like this has to do with capitalism, right? And yeah, so it's all mindset shifts, right? It's all going into the heart of, so that's why I always start with my activism with myself.
Yeah.
I'm, what story am I spinning that actually doesn't make sense right now?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to acknowledge that Lori said, I think all parents, regardless of child age, also worry about the emotional mental health of their family during shutdown and how we protect them from our own struggles. So there is like that added burden, the parent burden of like, wait a second, I'm experiencing, it's a total shit show for me. I'm stressed out, I'm anxious, I'm losing it, but I have to feel like I got to keep it together because I don't want to scare my kid or create a space that adds to the burden that's already happening for my child, you know? So I totally feel that, Lori, you know, and as a parent of a child who's in her 20s, do you know what I mean? Like, I can get that like, it doesn't go away. Like the parenting doesn't end just because the child is no longer 4 or 5. It's just a different relationship to the parenting, but I totally feel that. I also was thinking about, you know, for example, my grandmother, who's 97, what she says is the problem with this country is geography.
Yeah.
And what she means by that is that in the old country, you know, in Cuba, right, or in Spain, what you had was a very strong family nucleus that supported you, right? So like the aunts and the uncles and the cousins, and you know, I think about Deborah, she's one of 7. Do you know what I mean? So like a parent, you know, is like, well, your other sister will take care of it. Like there's a way in which like the familial the structure was also supported, you know, in that there were more people to support. And I think about my sister who's in Boston, you know, and luckily my parents are up there now, but like if my parents weren't up in Boston, my sister and her husband would be alone.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that there are ways in which geography and the structures supported, and I mean, yes, capitalism, but I think it was also more communal based, right? There was more like, there were circles of support that allowed people to be able to do what they had to do and also provide for family. The family was considered always in the equation. And I think this is interesting because now we're moving into, look at us pivoting into relational. Callan Blount Fleming, look at us moving into that.
Specifically, because I was like, we're segueing. I love it.
Yeah.
So when I think about the second level of activism, I think about what does it mean in my relationships and in my community. And a very formative experience for me was my husband did, in fact, ask me to marry him, and he did, in fact, convince me to have children, and I have 2 now. And we had a lot of discussions about how this was going to be an equal partnership, and I was going to continue to work in my career and all of these things. And I took a 6-month maternity leave. I returned to work. I was so excited to be back in that seat. And I got a phone call from our babysitter, Eliza, the first day back at work. By the way, my first day back at work, the second time around, also had a family emergency. So there's something there.
Just don't go back to work, Callan. Just don't go back to work.
Yeah, exactly. Eliza called and said she had the flu and that she needed to go home, and either Ben or I needed to come home and relieve her. And I hung up the phone, and I remember thinking a series of expletives, but then also thinking, like, how is it possible that I ran a team, I run an organization, I have plans A through Z always, but Ben and I never sat down and decided who was going to be in charge of this when this inevitably happened. And I decided, then all these kinds of thoughts came through my head, like, don't call him and interrupt his day. Like, he has meetings and cases and things. Like, he works 45 minutes away. You work 10 minutes away. Like, you're the one who's nursing. You've got the equipment. You should just go home, right? And but I committed to myself on the train ride home. I was like, I'm going to have the conversation tonight about what we do in this situation and how we're going to be equal partners. And then life happened and we didn't have that conversation. He was watching basketball and I was like, forget it. I'll just talk to him about it tomorrow and I'll just stay home the rest of the week, because it turns out Eliza does have the flu. And I finished my first week back at work, my first time being a mom, coming back to work with a massive glass of wine in my hand. This maybe like 5 hours of work done, and 17-year-old Callan from assembly in the back of my head being like, see, told you so. Like, there's no way you're going to be able to be a mom and be able to run this company and do both successfully. And so I think about this story because when we're thinking about things that aren't working, it's important to examine how we're operating in our relationships and in our community. And what was going on for me then, and you guys, it went on for 18 more months after having this baby, was that we were defaulting to me as the primary caregiver. Like, even though we'd had these hypothetical conversations about having an equal partnership, in reality, we had not set ourselves up to be intentional with a plan to push up against the inertia of a culture that calls mom first, right? And so the question for us, I think, in this is, how do we deprogram that in our relationships? And very specifically, when I work with clients, because it comes up with every client, we actually sit down and say, what is every single thing that you, and if you have a partner, if that's relevant to you, that you have to do? And do you really need to do it? And if you need to do it, can you do it a little differently so it saves you time? And now that we have your list, who's going to do it? And if they're going to own it, they're going to own it from the beginning of it all the way to the end, right? If your husband buys the groceries, like, he will always know if you need ketchup, right? You do not need to worry about the ketchup anymore. And
I love the specificity of that.
Yeah,
I love that.
Because when your daughter does not have ketchup with her chicken nuggets, that is a big deal, right? Right? I'm actually hoping we have ketchup right now that I think about it. So,
yeah. So Nicholas just wrote, these lists sound like they can be extensive. It's like,
they are. And that's why there's spreadsheets, because you can like cut and paste, and I mean,
color code and
color code
form
and
function.
And we can make fun of it, right? But like, I say this all the time to any client I'm coaching at work. I'm like, if you aren't having a conversation about what you expect of the other person, the only thing you're operating on is assumptions. And two people who come from different backgrounds, experiences, all of these different things, they're going to have different assumptions about how to work in the world. And so you just have to be clear and communicative, right?
And I think assumptions lead to resentments.
Totally. And I thank you for mentioning that, because I know so many people, men included too, who they get into this point of resentment where they kind of forget that they chose to marry the person in the first place. Or they chose to be with the person in the first place. Like, it can really overwhelm you. And this work that we do with folks to help them, you know, on the surface level, we're helping folks do their work better because we're helping them manage their time. But I've had clients say to me, like, you saved my marriage. Like, I remembered why I was in a relationship with my boyfriend in the first place, or my girlfriend in the first place, right? So, and let me just mention that too, like, I'm talking from the perspective of being, you know, folks who are in married and heterosexual couples, and we know that not every caregiver is in that situation. And in the case of this pandemic era parenting, what I really encourage people to think about is exactly what you were talking about, Eduardo. Like, we have created, there are many people believe that parenting now is an individual sport, but we need to shift our thinking into it being a team sport. So whether you're on a team with your partner or your co-parent, or you invite other people in, like your parents or your neighbors, like we're going to be better off if we start to see this as a communal responsibility. And this is proven in Europe. In Europe, there's much more of that mindset, and parents are much better off. So my question to all of us as we're thinking about, you know, activism at the relationship level is, how can we create community around us and pull on the support that we need in order to be successful, especially right now where we have too much to do. There's just way too much to do.
I think it's a great question, and let's allow an opportunity for people to reflect and perhaps place that in the chat, or if you feel compelled to share, you know, feel free to raise your hand. There's one thing that I wanted to highlight. I have a friend of mine who is a mother of two. She lives in Spain, and her husband, you know, has a job. She's a teacher, right? So then there's already this gendering in, like, he has some like type of office job, and then she's a teacher, right? And there's almost like when he comes back from, when he finishes his workday, it's like he expects like a break from the workday.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing is that she doesn't get a break.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing, and I didn't even consider this, but who's thinking about, is the homework getting done? Like, do they have the stuff that they like for their lunch sandwich, you know, for that they have to make at night? Like, who's, like 3 weeks from now is the costume parade, and who has the items for the costume parade, you know, and then there's the PTA meeting. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, on top of, like, I have a full-time job and there's all these things that I'm managing, there's also the mental exhaustion, you know, of like all the other things that, like, I love Lori's like, more like 3 hours to the parade. Exactly. It's like, I forgot, and the parade is today, and now everything's tossed up and I'm at Michael's with the glue gun. Do you know what I mean? So there's that added level of energy that it takes to also think about all those things. That's also work.
Yes, it's all, yeah.
It's all work. It's all work, and no one counts that.
It's all work. It doesn't get counted. And there's actually, for people who like to nerd out about economics, there's this new movement to actually include what's now unpaid labor into our GDP. Because if you track it, you care, right? If you, especially in a capitalistic society, if you put a value on it, people will pay attention to it. And I think the last report was that, like, all of that unpaid labor amounts to something like $10 trillion a year, if you're paid at minimum wage. You know, think about the people who bill $1,000 an hour, right? Like, it's really interesting. The mental load piece that you're talking about is a really interesting phenomenon. And I think of it the way that I used to manage a team, which is, when we delegated something, we made it very clear that it's yours to own, and you're like ultimately responsible for it. And I think there needs to be that kind of communication within our relationships. I also think there needs to be the recognition that, like, women aren't like naturally good at this. This isn't just like something we like became really like that we're naturally good at. It's all construct, right? So we need to get more comfortable with anyone, however they identify in their gender, taking on these responsibilities.
Ruby just wrote, I think it is a great idea to have that conversation, like tool shed meetings. It drives me crazy when I hear women say,
Yes.
man is babysitting.
Yes.
Doing caregiving. Yeah.
He's the dad, not the babysitter.
Totally.
And God bless the God bless the folks who ask the question, what can I do to help you? And they get their head bitten off, because it's like, you should know. Why are you asking me? Right?
Look at the fucking spreadsheet. It's in red. You asshole. There it is.
You know, so.
I want ketchup. There's no ketchup in the fucking refrigerator.
Yeah, and there are a few books that I highly recommend if you're interested. Like Tiffany Dufresne wrote an amazing book called Drop the Ball that kind of inspired me in this. And like, those are the moments. Like, she put her husband in charge of opening mail. He didn't open mail for a year. And she refused to open the mail for him because she was like, it is your responsibility. If we miss weddings and birthday parties and bills, it's on you. And like, you gotta, like, that's the other thing, is that sometimes I think men say, I want to help, but I get corrected, or I want to help, and my wife then swoops in and does it right after me. And I know that I need to be better at being like, if I ask you to buy insurance, I need to trust you bought the insurance and not go call the insurance provider and find out if you called and no, like, we have to trust each other and let it go.
Yeah. And then now I think we've been in the personal journey, and then we're looking relationship wise, and how are we building relationships around us, which include partnership, family, who else is in our network that can support us in the parenting. Yeah. And I think then we take it to the next level, which is in systems, organization, community, office space, I imagine, but also politically, like all the various other ways that we can manage with systems to shift this conversation.
Yep, that's it. So I think about systems, I think primarily right now in the framework of governments and companies. And so before I was a mom, I was a manager, and I worked with a colleague and managed a colleague from time to time named Martin, who called me about, he called me one day from Washington, D.C., because he and his daughter had been down there for their baby shower, and his wife went into early labor. They had their baby at 29 weeks, which at the time I didn't even know how many weeks you were supposed to be pregnant. Turns out 40. So 29 feels like just a little bit shy of, of halfway, or a little bit more than halfway. And he told me that our company was giving him his 2 weeks of paternity leave, but expected him to come back in person to work 2 weeks later in New York City. And so he would be traveling back and forth on Amtrak between DC and New York, because premature babies cannot leave the hospital until they're basically full term. And I also didn't know at the time that premature babies, there's like a lot of tests and like a lot of things that could possibly happen and go wrong. So his wife was going to be there, full time too. And so I didn't know all these details, but I did know in my gut that this was a special and precarious little situation, and I needed to be thoughtful about how I managed it. And so I reached out to my mentors and I asked them, what do I do in this situation? Like, how should I manage this? And the advice from everyone was, you need to act like it's business as usual. Like, if you give him any sort of special accommodation, then Johnny down the block wants a special accommodation. And if you give him any sort of leeway, he's going to take total advantage of you as a leader. Like, you need to hold strong in high expectations. And so a few weeks later, poor Martin was on the train again, going between New York and DC. And he sent me a note saying, hey, I'm about to send this document to a really, really big client, and I would love your thoughts on it. And I opened the document, and it's got typos and fonts are all off, and it's not color coded. I'll tell you that. And I heeded the advice of my mentors, and I probably went a little too hard into it. And as soon as he answered the phone when I called him, I just launched into some pretty specific feedback and pointed and really lacking in a lot of compassion. And to Martin's credit, he came right back at me. He was like, you made a bunch of assumptions about what I was asking you for. I'm on my way back to DC after my kid having a bunch of tests today. The results are good, but it was on my mind. Like, I was asking for partnership, not approval, things like that. And 2 weeks later, unsurprisingly, Martin quit. And I felt awful. I felt awful for him personally and what he was going through and what must have driven him to that decision, including myself. but also how I was creating an environment in this company where it was quite apparent that parents could not be successful. And if I think that we're all kind of going through a Martin moment right now. Like, things are really stressful. We are very unsure of what's going on. We don't know when this thing is going to end. We feel scared for our health and safety of ourselves and the people that we love. And the world, it feels like, is telling us it is just business as usual. Like, just figure it out and show up to work and do it really well. And it's cool if your kids are in the back of the Zoom, that's cute, but we still need you to put in 10 to 12 hours a day. And so what I do in my work, like how I think about this, is like, how can I relieve the pressure for parents tomorrow? Is that I think we need to do a better job of teaching their managers how to be cool with them working a 5 or 6 hour day. Like, care more about the results of what people are doing instead of the face time and the process of what people are doing. You know, get really good at managing equitably, not equally. That is our biggest, like, that is where we totally get caught up when it comes to managing parents. It's like, well, if we give this to parents, what do we give to non-parents? That's not the conversation, you know? And when we talk to parents and support parents, we're like, right now, you need to be a 5-star rock star level prioritizer. And we recognize that probably no one has ever taught you how to do that. And you've kind of learned it trial by fire style, and you're in the middle of a bonfire and just need some support. And we talk to parents about, like, how are you going to have challenging conversations with people while still reserving the relationship and your political capital at work? Like, these are the things that we can do right now within companies. But I think ultimately, and this is what my talk with Fearless Force was about, is that our companies need to go from centering the average person, right? This, like, ideal worker that we have created companies around, to centering the people we perceive as being the outliers. You know, that we perceive parents to be the outliers, even though they're 40% of our workforce. Like, it's time for us to put them at the center. And by the way, we'll do really great work while we do it. But we need to shift that thinking.
And I think it is the shifting of the industrial age, right? So there is the industrial, like, and our schools are built that way. Our work hours are built that way. And it's just like a bunch of dudes saying, you work 9 to 5. And everyone's like, okay, we work 9 to 5. And that's what we're going to, you know, and that doesn't work for everybody, you know. And instead of forcing everyone into that, and I think that the great disruption of COVID-19, working from home and all that other stuff, I think it's created more opportunities for creativity. And I don't think we are going back to whatever there was before. And it's a great opportunity to take a stake in what will emerge, right? And I think that this is a type of advocacy now that I think it's important, as people are imagining, like, what does it look like to go back to school or go back to work? I think for people to start on the advocacy level, coming in and saying, okay, great, like, what we had before didn't work. So let's, like, stop, or it worked for who it worked for, but it actually, and it actually didn't work for everybody else. So let's actually be curious about what about it didn't work for everybody else. Because if we consider where it didn't work for everybody else, we're actually more inclusive so that it works for everybody, which is, I think, the stuff that you talk about, Callan, that I think that in the consideration of the outlier, we include the inlier. But it is only in the thinking of, you know, straight, male, 32, you know, engaged, Ivy League, you know, learning abled, you know, physically abled, you know, person, you know, who then, if that's the ideal, then everybody else has to conform to that. And it's like, no, that's actually not. And I think it's in that space that we have the ageism that we have in our companies. It's the ableism that we have in our companies. Yeah. You know, it's the gender bias that we have in our organizations. All of that is based on the performance of something which works for some, but doesn't work for the vast majority of us.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Nikki is signing off. Thank you so much, Nikki, for being here on the call with us. Bye. So Callan, how do people connect with you? What are the ways that they can follow this amazing work that you're up to? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that I appreciate everything you said about taking this as that opportunity to say it's not working or it needs to work differently. And one thing I've been thinking about is part of the reason why I think we don't take action is because we don't know what to do, or sitting down with a blank document in front of us and being like, what do I write to somebody is just intimidating. So one thing that I've put together is an email template that people can cut and paste and fashion to their own voice and company situation that begins a conversation with their HR leaders or their boss or their business unit leader or whomever about like, what are we really doing for parents? Like, how are we getting real in this situation? So if that's something that you're interested in grabbing from me, or if you have friends and family and loved ones who work in different companies and you're like, I bet they could use that. Like, it's free, it's for them to use. It is meant to spark a conversation. Obviously,
Collective, look at that. I mean, I got that. Spark. Yes.
You did.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, like I said, like there's so many different ways to approach this. And the one where I really feel like I am being called is in supporting people right now in the practical day-to-day of getting through this with skills and mindsets. And so, if that sounds interesting to people personally, or people could be interesting with, they can go to my website or they can shoot me a note and we can just have that conversation. But really, I think what my biggest ask is of everybody is to just think on those levels, right? Like when you feel like you're up against something that's not working for you, what to examine in yourself, what to examine in your relationships, and what to examine at the systems level. And the answer is you'll probably have to do a little bit of both or a little bit in all areas, right? Because they're all kind of intermixed. But I just think we have so much opportunity to take the rumbling that's happening right now and the understanding that the systems that we had in place were barely taped together by that like crappy clear tape that you buy at Duane Reade. Like it was barely working to begin with, and now it's not working at all. And like, how can we create something that's different? And I don't want us to lose this shot. Like, I really don't want us to lose it. And so that's in dinner table conversations. That's in how you vote in November. It's in everything. But let's this sucks. The pandemic sucks. But let's try to just take this opportunity in the realm of parents and try to make it better for us in the long term.
Because I'm not giving up my shot. I'm not giving away my shot. I'm like going straight into Hamilton.
Yeah.
So Callan, thank you so much for this beautiful conversation, elevated sparkleish. And we will send out to everyone who registered the contact information so they can get a hold of you. And if you want to send along the PDF to us, we can also ensure that we can send that to everyone. And I think we can also circulate that within our networks and our parents so they can have tools for advocacy, because again, it's that blank page where you're like, what do I say?
Yeah, what do I say? What am I asking?
What do I say? What am I asking for? Like, to have something there, I think as a model is really helpful.
Yeah.
And what's also great is that you were also a manager, so you've also been on the side of like the receiving of it. So it's not just like I'm shooting this in the dark, but you're also speaking into like you frame something that is speaking into what's actually going to resonate with someone who's in a management capacity, which I think is really powerful.
Yeah.
So Callan, again, thank you so much for being here with us. Next week, we have Jessica Robinson, and we're going to talk about cybersecurity. And we're talking about cybersecurity now that we're parenting and working from home and schooling from home. There's a great opportunity to refresh, in this landscape. I mean, we had a very early conversation on cybersecurity and how we're protecting ourselves. And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of do a little gut check and check in what are the systems that we have in place to actually protect ourselves and our family. Jessica Robinson runs a business called PurePoint International. She's an African-American woman who talks about cybersecurity as love. And it's like a feminine approach to talking about cybersecurity. And it's really, really awesome. And she's like extremely knowledgeable and really, really practical and helpful in the tools that she gives around that. And then we're pivoting into, after that, post-Labor Day. And we have a lot of really fun things that are emerging. One of the things that we're looking to showcase, what are the stories that we're telling in the fall, right? So now we're in a time for harvesting, you know, also seasonally, but looking at how we can continue to craft and share the stories that have been emerging for us. And I think it's also a great opportunity in the space of, you know, the rhythm that we have for the election in the United States, you know, looking at issues and activism that can also frame us, how we can engage, how can we be involved, who are people in our network that are thinking about the topics that are really resonating and really vibrating in this current moment. So we can give light and energy to that as well. So that's a little bit about what's coming up for us in the coming weeks. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. And we have a beautiful little ritual that we have to complete our call. And what we do is we hold up our hands. Vivian, I don't know if you can hear us, if you're able to be with us, but you'll see how this goes. And basically, what we do is we acknowledge each other and we thank each other. So, and after you are complete, you lower your hand. So then we move on to somebody else. So I'm going to start by saying, Diana, who's standing on Wurundjeri land in Australia, I see you and I thank you.
Thank you, Eduardo. Laurie, I see you and I thank you.
My good friend Diana, it's good to see you. Ruby, I see you and I thank you.
Deborah, I see you and I thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. Nice to see you again. Callan, I see you, Mama. I see you. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Ben, I see you and I thank you.
Eduardo, are you the only one left?
I think I'm left.
I see you and I thank you.
Thank you, Queen. And I see you all and I thank you all. Thank you all so much for being here with us. Yeah.